You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi. On this episode, I bring you a spontaneous interview with the artist and musician Brian Walsby. Brian is well known for his limited edition t-shirts at Bifocal Media. His art is fantastic, and Brian is the artist who actually drew my favorite Propagandhi shirt of all time. In this episode, we talk about his love of art, his process for drawing a band like Propagandhi, the adventures in Zukosis drawing that I bought from him literally today, his favorite tunes by the band, and how Scott Radinsky from Pulley ties into his Propagandhi journey. Follow Brian on Instagram at Brian Walsby, and go check out his website at brianwalsby.net. Thank you so much to my friend Brett at the Rad Dads podcast for helping me connect with Brian. Here we go. Brian Walsby, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Brian, I am so delighted to have you here. For those of the people out there listening who don't know you, do you just kind of want to introduce yourself a little bit and kind of say a little bit about your work?
Okay. Well, my name is Brian. I draw. I've drawn since I was a little kid. I also play music occasionally. So I'm one of those creative weirdo people, I guess. I was kind of set on this path at a very early age where music and art seemed to be the only things that I could do that made me feel like a normal human being.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of, and I just kind of stuck with it. You know, I've done virtually the same thing since I was 10 years old, which is listen to music and draw while listening to music for the most part. And I've just, you know, I'm an older, I'm probably going to guess I'm going to be an older person than some of the other people that you probably would normally talk to. I'm 57 years old, so I'm definitely not a youngster. And I just kind of stuck with what I was doing and have sort of turned it into a half-assed kind of self-employed kind of art career, which is really awesome when things work out and really terrifying when they don't.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just kind of used to living in a state of near panic and fear at every opportunity. And along the way, I've played music in probably 20 bands over the years since 1985. And I kind of came of age during the early to mid 80s punk rock / heavy metal underground. Both of those scenes were kind of similar. You'd had to write letters to people and you know, like most people would say, there was no internet back then or whatever. So if you wanted to find out about stuff, you would just have to write letters, trade tapes, tape trades, and you know, buy fanzines and stuff like that. And I was really immersed in that kind of world, and that got me to relocate to where I've been living for the last 30 plus years in Raleigh, North Carolina. But I grew up in Southern California. So I was there until mid 86. Then I've been here ever since.
Amazing.
And so I moved out here because I was really into the band Corrosion of Conformity, as they were back then. They were like my favorite band, and they were really nice guys. I came out and visited the summer of 1985. I was in a band called Scared Straight. It was our first tour away from home. Our parents let us go, which seems kind of fucking crazy now looking back. And I ended up here because the tour, we got totally ripped off in Pittsburgh. We toured with this band called Ill Repute.
Yeah.
And I ended up here and I hung out with the COC guys, and met all their friends. And Raleigh had a really cool little scene back then. And I decided when I came back home to the West Coast that I was going to move out here. So that's basically my life story in a nutshell. And here I am.
Amazing. Is the Scared Straight you're talking about, is that eventually became 10-Foot Pole? And I think that Jordan from Strung Out was in that band for a while. Yes.
Jordan Burns. Yeah. Scared Straight. I was in Scared Straight for 2 occasions, which was like a sort of like a year between the end of 84 and the end of 85, I ended up going on 2 tours, even though I wasn't really in the band. For the second tour, the drummer they got that replaced me, when I went wandering to the East Coast, he couldn't go. And Jordan was in this band called The Grimm, and I got a chance to use his really nice, sweet drum set that was really nice. It was like a real Iron Maiden, Clive Burr sort of drum set.
Yeah.
And that was really nice. And every once in a while, I'll hear from Jordan from social media, and he'll say something nice, and then I'll say something nice back.
Nice.
So, but yeah, that's the lineage. Scared Straight. Then they became 10-Foot Pole. Then they asked Scott to leave, and Scott started Pulley with another friend of mine, Mike Harder.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess Dennis kept 10-Foot Pole going. So that's the history of that.
Wonderful. Well, Scott was on this podcast as a guest for our Dear Coach's Corner episode a ways back. So that's kind of fun to see that circle come around a little bit. Scott
is one of the 2 people that turned me on to Propagandhi.
Amazing.
Because the reason why that happened is because I moved away before all that stuff happened. Like all the like NoFX turning into a good band, and like a band that people actually enjoyed.
Yeah.
And Bad Religion becoming famous, and then all those other bands started. Suddenly they were in this climate where they could go on tour and make money and have, some sort of, I guess a different kind of success. I never heard any of that stuff. I've never heard Strung Out. I couldn't tell you a single NoFX song. I just don't know any of that stuff. I mean, I know it, but I wasn't an active participant. And I remember telling Scott that, because Scott was like, well, yeah, the scene's totally different. Describing how Scared Straight shifted into 10-Foot Pole and what was going on for all those bands to suddenly be in this environment where that stuff could happen. And he said, the only band that you would probably like out of all that stuff is Propagandhi. That's literally what he said. And they played me Night Letters from supporting cast. Right?
Yeah.
And I was like, so within 5 seconds, I'm like, because I'm not saying that stuff is not good or whatever. I just don't think I ever would have ever paid attention to it. And then within a minute, I was like, oh yeah, I like this, because it's kind of metally, but still sort of hard to classify and super tight sounding and intricate. And then the lyrics seemed like they meant something. I'm not a big lyric guy, but if somebody writes good lyrics, I usually can pick up on, oh, this actually means something to them. And they had all that going on. And so Scott basically was the person that said, well, you'll like these guys. And he was right. And he said, these guys are clearly far away the best band to ever come out of the universe that we all came out of, hands down. He wasn't, that's what he said. As an old time metal punk guy that you are, Brian, you'll appreciate it. And he's right.
Man.
But the thing that's really funny is I would go back, because I went backwards, and all that early, the first Propagandhi record. There was no, I'm not trying to put it down or whatever, but there was just no way I would ever have paid attention to anything like that.
Amazing.
So I think they just keep getting better. Especially when Todd joined.
Yeah.
Onward. And the last 3 records they've done, I think, are their best records. I know that some people feel the opposite, but to me, it's just my opinion. But I think they just keep growing, and they put a lot of stuff into their music, and I responded to that. But yeah, the early stuff is not the stuff I would have ever paid any attention to. I occasionally will go back and listen to it and just go nah, this is not for me.
Well, I love that you love the newer stuff, though, because for me, those are my favorite records, too. I am far more into the later era stuff where they bring in a lot more of the metallic elements that they originally wanted to do in the first place. Because Chris and George grew up playing metal, and I'm sure that you know that they love Corrosion of Conformity as well.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So, I mean, that really makes sense. So, but I am 100% on your side in this argument here about their newest stuff being like the way that they're supposed to be.
I don't really understand how people that like punk rock could sort of could generalize all heavy metal as being this one stupid thing when there's like a million different versions of punk rock, and a lot of those aren't any good at all. Because heavy metal is like, it's kind of like punk rock. The better forms of it, it's really good rebel music. It's like, which is what punk rock is all about. And like people that are, I just don't know how you can really be anti-heavy metal like across the board, because like the best heavy metal is easily as good as the best punk rock to me.
Yeah.
I mean, but I also came of age during kind of an exciting time in heavy metal, underground heavy metal, which was very similar to punk rock. I mean, like Slayer, Voivod, early Metallica, the first couple Trouble records. I mean, those records were, to me, as important as, say, the Sex Pistols album, or early Ramones, or Black Flag Damaged, or the first Adolescence album, or the first Descendants record. It's like, I just thought of it as just being good music. So I don't understand why people have this bias against all heavy metal. Some heavy metal sucks.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of it does, but you could easily say the same thing about punk rock. A lot of punk rock fucking blows.
Yeah.
I think. Sorry for cursing. I don't know if that's allowed.
I mean, this is a podcast about Propagandhi where they have a song called, Fuck the Border and everything like that. So we really have no choice then to be a podcast that has swearing. So don't even worry about it.
There'll be a lot of beep, beep.
Yeah. I keep thinking about your love of Corrosion of Conformity. I finally got to see Corrosion of Conformity live relatively recently when they were playing with the Melvins in Ministry. But seeing Woody play guitar was one of my favorite musical moments in recent memory. But as you know, Propagandhi did that cover of Technocracy,
which is really good.
Really good. Tell me a little bit about your appreciation of like the different eras of Corrosion of Conformity, because like it ties into what we did on the Sacrifice Propagandhi split 7-inch episode, and I'm just wondering if you wanted to kind of go into some of your favorite ideas about COC.
Oh, well, sure. Well, I think the one thing about Corrosion of Conformity back then, like they were like this underground band that came out of Raleigh, and they were like the biggest band out of their little scene. They put out their first record, Eye for an Eye, in 1984, and I just remember buying it and just being floored by it. It's not the world's greatest sounding record, and their first lead singer, Eric, he's not the world's greatest singer, of course. He was like this macho Henry Rollins kind of guy barking into a microphone. But at the time, that was fine. But like musically, Mike, Woody, and Reed, they just had something. They had this nice chemistry, and they kind of sort of combined Black Sabbath and Black Flag at a time where not a lot of people really were doing that. I mean, the Melvins would end up doing that a year later, perhaps. I mean, they were already on their way, and there was a band called Blast that I liked a lot that were kind of doing the same thing, but they kind of modeled themselves a little bit after what Black Flag started, and throw in Black Sabbath. Nobody really. Black Sabbath were obviously a huge influence, but back then, I didn't really know any heavy metal people that liked Black Sabbath. It was like punk rock people that were open-minded that were like, we grew up on Black Sabbath. We like this as much as we like the Circle Jerks or whatever. But those guys had a great chemistry, and so right away they got attention back then, and particularly Reed, because Reed was such a great drummer. Like he was like next in line after, say, Bill Stevenson. Like everyone knew Bill Stevenson was a great drummer, and then the next guy that came out of the underground that seemed to gather a lot of attention was Reed. And Reed had this giant red Tama, Clive Burr, another Clive Burr reference for your Propagandhi interview from Iron Maiden. And he had these giant sticks, and because Chuck Biscuits had giant sticks, and he was a total force of nature. And Mike and Woody they wrote weird riffs, and they were either the best band in the world when they were a three-piece, or the worst band in the world. But they were usually the best band. People would come through and they'd open for them, and they would just hand their asses back to them. They were really good. And they've changed throughout the years and whatever. There was actually a period of time where they had this guy Simon Bob Sinister. That was the first time they had like an actual singer, somebody that tried to sing that wasn't like
yeah.
And the reaction was very mixed because it was new territory, and wasn't quite sure that Bob was a great fit, but that ushered in all this new music that they never recorded. So there's this missing in action year where all this music never saw the light of day that they had because Mike Dean quit. That was like 86 or whatever. And then some of that stuff ended up on this project that Mike and Woody started with me playing drums, I guess filling in for Reed, called Snake Nation. And half of that record were those Mike Dean COC songs that were lost to history.
Wow.
Which is really too bad because, I was just trying to approximate what Reed could do. It was an honor, but it was like kind of weird at the same time. And the recording came out kind of half-assed, but, they're still a good band. It's not really my cup of tea as much anymore, but more power to those guys. It was a bummer about Reed, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Not a very happy story.
Yeah.
Stuff unfortunately happens to people. So, what can you say? But they were, at one point, they were certainly my favorite band, and I can still play 90% of Animosity and feel the same exact way as I did 50 years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
What do you think about them as they are now compared to that?
Well, so it's way different for me because I didn't grow up with that. I was born in 83. So when Animosity and Technocracy came out, I was like, less than 5 years old. Exactly. But I did get really into Wise Blood and Deliverance in middle school.
Yeah.
And so I have a very strong affinity for the Pepper Keenan era Corrosion of Conformity because that was some of my introduction into heavy music. One of the first heavy albums I ever owned was Wise Blood because I traded for it to somebody in my middle school. So I just really love the Pepper era because just the time and place of when they hit me. And so, funnily, I was actually in New Orleans in January, and I went to Pepper Keenan's bar, which is on Magazine Street in New Orleans, and I had a beer in the middle of the day at his Magazine Street bar. So anyway, I love that Pepper era stuff too, because one of my introductions to metal in general. Yeah,
nice. Yeah, he, regardless of what people think, his presence took them and put them in front of a whole new audience. And it became a lot more successful commercially.
Totally.
That probably wouldn't have happened if he hadn't showed up and stepped up to the microphone. So
yeah. Well, let's chat about art a little bit. You've done numerous Propagandhi drawings, and I'm actually looking at your website right now, brianwalsby.net, where I presume these are your actively for sale shirts. And I'm seeing great stuff here. Napalm Death, 7 Seconds. I see a Blast shirt that you just mentioned. I see a Scared Straight shirt on there, which is hilarious and awesome. Melvins, so many of the bands that you've already listed are like for sale on your site. And I bought one from you one time. It was a Propagandhi t-shirt that has the drawings of Chris Sulin, Jordan Todd being chased essentially by like a gigantic robot in the sky. And I'm wondering if you can just like tell me a little bit about your work with Propagandhi as an artist and kind of what you would start to what your process is like for depicting a band like this.
It's usually based on humor. They have serious subject matter in their songs, and they care about what they sing about, and they have a lot of food for thought. I'm not sure that I'm so great at conveying those sort of messages, so I usually just fall back on humor or parodies, or like the t-shirt you were talking about, that's like a parody of the band Queen had a record called News of the World with a really frightening front cover of a painting of a giant robot crushing the members of Queen. And on the inside of the record, it's a gatefold sleeve. It's the same artist with the painting is of the robot reaching into this building, and everybody's all freaked out in the painting. And that's where I put the members of Propagandhi in there. So it's supposed to be that kind of thing. I'm just trying to find some kind of good idea or something kind of funny. Again, I haven't quite. I've drawn a few things that ended up being used for people like Steve Ignorant from Crass and that kind of thing. But that was just like taking the Crass symbol and putting something in front of it, putting them in front of it or whatever, or Steve in front of it. I'm not quite there yet as far as depicting something that's kind of serious and meaningful. So the closest I got was the drawing that you bought, because that song sort of, as a parent, that song sort of made me get kind of teary-eyed a little bit, because you know, that's kind of a powerful song. And I just thought maybe I can try to convey that. And I'm not really sure I did, but obviously I must have done something right because you bought it. But I'm just trying to find some kind of good idea. And those guys, for whatever reason, Todd seemed to like the thing that was a shirt. I've tried to like find some other things that could be also used, but I haven't really come across anything yet that had the same impact. But hopefully soon. Usually it's just been like, they like Venom, so I drew them as Venom one time.
Yeah.
Seen that. They're big fans of Voivod. I'm a huge fan of Voivod. I've drawn them as in that style a few times. But like I said before, I haven't been able to really figure out a better idea for what could be another shirt. I mean, and the opportunity is open. I just have to come up with something really good, and I haven't done so yet. I guess. Does that make sense? Yeah,
totally. Do you reach out to the band? Like, do you and Todd or anybody like correspond about artistic ideas? Because Todd's a great artist too, so I'm sure he's,
Todd's a phenomenal artist. He's like so modest about it. He's like one of the best painters I've ever seen. He's really good. And he also has this very, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but not like an anti-commercial sort of viewpoint of what he does. I think he's just kind of keeping it to himself kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, he's also not drawing for his survival. So, that it kind of makes maybe the way you view that kind of stuff differently. He's the guy that I've talked to the most out of all of them. We haven't really spent that much time talking about mutual art inspirations, but he seems very, I don't want to say overqualified, but he's obviously very gifted and talented, not just painter, but artist. The stuff he just whips out on his Instagram page is pretty impressive. Like, if he wanted to take advantage of that and try to sell some of his stuff, I'm sure he could do it. I don't know if he's doing that at this point, but he could easily, hands down.
So you did mention that I bought a piece of art from you. I bought a drawing depicting Adventures in Zoochosis, the closing track on Victory Lap. And
it's right here.
You've already got it packaged up. Awesome. I'm so excited to get my hands on that. I'm wondering if there is what inspiration you may have had for any of the characters in the drawing itself. Are there any particular people that you were trying to depict in the kids and then in the parent?
I drew like the girl. There's a girl in there. I guess Chris has two boys.
Yeah,
I think he wrote the song, so obviously he's writing it from the viewpoint of being a parent to two boys. I guess. I think I just might have put a girl in there because I have a daughter. No other real reason. I didn't really think about it too much. It doesn't really. The way they look doesn't really mean anything. I guess I was just trying to make a serious kind of drawing, I suppose. So that's pretty much it. Again, that song really stood out for whatever reason, probably because of the whole parent thing, and then the whole being resigned to your fate as a human being.
Yeah.
What's going to inevitably happen to you, being a parent or not, being worried about what's going to happen to your children, but knowing that you have really, you don't really control the world or anything.
Did you, so I'm looking at another one of your drawings that you did with Killing Technocracy written at the top. Tell me a little bit about this drawing.
Well, I was combining my enjoyment of Voivod and obviously Coercion Conformity. So it's just, nerdy fanboy art. I think that was another thing I was kind of hoping somebody would go, man, that has to be a great t-shirt or whatever. I don't know. It's probably just sort of some good-natured pandering to those guys to see if it worked out. And, just another one of those pandering drawings.
Awesome. What is I want to know a little bit about if you have like a specific favorite record by the band, if you have a specific favorite song. I'm curious if you have any.
Propagandhi?
Yeah.
For whatever reason, the song that's the lead-off track of the Fiction song.
Oh, Speculative Fiction from Potemkin City Limits?
That one.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, that song just really does it for me every time. I don't know why. Just the combination of the music, it's kind of metally sounding, the very dramatic lyrical content of the world being thrust into this horrible situation, end of the world scenario in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And just something about the music and lyrics really match up really well. So that one, for whatever reason, that's always one of their songs that really kind of gets it for me. I just really seem to like it a lot. Night Letters, I like Night Letters. Without Love, I like that song a lot. The song about the creek on
Devil's Creek, yeah, that's one of my favorites too.
I really like that one. Just the combination of how they just kind of utilize these other influences and have this very seamless kind of way of interpreting the heavy metal sort of influences that they have with their punk rock kind of influences. And the fact that their punk rock influences obviously don't seem to come from what they were associated with at first. Does that make sense? I think those guys are like a tiny bit younger than me, maybe 1 or 2 years younger than me, something like that, or 3 or 4 years, I don't know. But their influences across the board in music in general seem to not be what they're associated with or what they initially were. So does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. So, and also, and I'm not trying to go off on a tangent, but the other thing that impressed me, I've only seen them one time. Me and my wife and a friend of ours, we drove up from North Carolina to, I think, Baltimore. But what really impressed me was that after the show was over, other people broke down their stuff and the band just sort of came to the front of the stage. And if anybody had anything they wanted to say or talk to them about anything, they were there. And, I had spent 10 years working for the Melvins.
Mm.
And, and that ended like 3 years ago. And the last couple of years of that, it was fine. It was a really nice opportunity. I'm definitely grateful to those guys for being able to do it. But the last couple of years, I was like, it was clear it was time for me to move on. And then just watching Propagandhi, talking to people that had questions about their lyrics and just maybe they had written a song that really meant something to somebody and somebody wanted to talk to them about it. And the fact that they were agreeable and just talk, I'm sure there's some knuckleheads that show up to talk, but for the most part, it seemed like a very chill exchange of ideas. And I just remember thinking this never would fucking happen during my old job. That there's no way. It was very interesting to see that exchange of ideas. Just because I really hadn't seen that a lot from what I was doing.
Amazing.
So yeah. I mean, I appreciate the fact that they think a lot about all kinds of different things, and they want to share that and put that in, in their music. I'm not. I don't have any problem with any of it. For the most part, I agree with a lot of what they talk about. I'm not really gonna nickel and dime anybody over. Well, you said this, and I hate that shit. When people are
right.
like, well, 20 years ago in a fanzine interview, you said you thought this, but I just saw this online, and you're going back on your word, motherfucker. I hate that shit. In general, I agree with what they talk about, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness that they have in bringing these ideas, into their music. And people can just take them or leave them, and most people seem to take them.
Yeah.
I've read people that really have a problem with all that. But it's like, all they're doing is just, like anybody else, all they're doing is presenting these ideas in their music. You can like them, you can not like them, but that's all it is. It's up to you to decide. There's people that get stuff out of Bon Jovi lyrics.
Yeah.
They'll find a way to get something meaningful out of that. So it's like, it's not up to me to decide where meaning and beauty exists. But I do appreciate the fact that they put a lot of thought into not just the musical end of things, but the lyrics too.
Yeah. Well, I love that you're also into the ones that talk about the personal, emotional aspects, because Propagandhi has so many songs where, back in the old days, especially, they would bash people over the head with a really complicated array of ideas. But the songs that to me are some of my favorites are when they dive into the family aspect and the very personal aspect. Like Devil's Creek is one of the most intimate things you can do, to talk about your favorite place that you used to go to feel safe and adventurous when you were a young child. Incredible. Yeah. Like the song Without Love, watching a beloved pet and a grandparent pass away. So incredible. Adventures in Zoochosis, about being a parent, like kind of scared about for the future of your own children.
Yeah.
Amazing. Those are the types of things that I really enjoy the most, honestly. And I'm really glad to see that you kind of like latched on that as well. That's why I bought that Zoochosis drawing. I was like, I connect so much with that topic that I just kind of have to have it.
Yeah. Like the personal stuff, it can't, I don't even know where to really begin, but the personal stuff, since it is sort of about real life kind of stuff and not just speculation or pitting. I'm not saying this is what Propagandhi does, but so much like, especially these days with social media and stuff, it's like, like everybody has an opinion about something.
Yeah.
You're expected to have, with culture today, you're expected to react to things the second it happens. And, because now that's just the norm, whereas before, if you didn't want to hear about something, you would never hear about it. And now you have to hear about everything the second it happens, if you partake in either holding a cell phone glued to your hand or whatever. And that just seems to bring out the worst in people, So like, even if I agree with a lot of the things that, and I do, I'm more of a left-leaning sort of person, I still am kind of hesitant to really brush stroke these people and that people. And if you think this, then you're not this. And, I'm just too old for that kind of divide and conquer sort of nonsense. And now I'm getting to the point where it's like, now I can see, the ageism stuff, like, okay, boomer and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, I can't apologize for being old.
Right.
That's what you want to have happen, and that's going to happen to you unless you get killed when you're young or whatever. So like, the personal stuff, especially about trying to just be a good person, and if you're a parent and you're trying to figure things out, it's like an ongoing journey. That stuff means a lot more to me. It's almost like pointing the finger at yourself instead of pointing the finger outside, because anybody can do that.
Yeah.
Things, the world's just the way the world is. Sometimes it's a really nice place. Other times it's a fucking horrible place. That's just the way it is. People are no different. When you hear people say stuff like, I can't believe it's the year 2023 and people still think like this. That's like, do you really, is that honestly what you really think? You really think that people, it's just human nature to be a horrible person at times. That's just how it goes. Some people are really nice. Some people are not. That's just the way it goes. That's human nature. That's history in a nutshell. So I'm more about the personal aspects of things than a bunch of finger pointing and, or if you say anything and then you get stuff back in your face, like, okay, white male or whatever. It's like,
Well, and the band is really good about that too. Like within their lyrics, like they're really great about pointing the mirror back at themselves. I say this on the show often that one of the greatest lines that they've ever put out to me is, I'll call you on your shit, you call me on mine. Because what that does is it communicates that, yeah, I have shit too. And that I need somebody to hold me, like, to tell me whenever I can grow, essentially. The band is really good about presuming that human beings of any age can grow, in my view, and we can all continue to grow throughout our lives. So I get what you're saying.
Sure.
For sure.
Sure. I mean, there's I'm getting ready to look for a therapist to talk to about some stuff that,
Mm-hmm.
I'm in my 5th decade of life, and there's stuff that I've realized this is kind of problematic. Like I'm kind of a stubborn person. I didn't used to think so 20 years ago, but as things have turned out, I can see that that's turned out to be sort of a problematic thing that I only have recently discovered, and I want to try to figure that out. I want to try to figure that out more than blaming other people for stuff that is probably not even their fault, or just to be like you. It's more like, well, it starts with me.
Yeah.
And I want to try to be a better person.
Also, I love it.
Another important thing that people need to do, especially now, is they need to kind of, like, when things aren't going good, they need to just allow themselves to give themselves a break. We're all just human beings. We're not destined or built to be perfect. So to hold yourself up at the super high standard that's impossible to live by, depending on whatever situation you're in, sometimes you just have to give yourself a break and just say, you're a human being. We're not perfect.
I love it. Brian, where, so I'd presume a lot of people out there might want to check out your artwork too. Where would you send folks to connect with you if they want to see what it is that you're up to and what it is that you've done?
Well, the easiest way now, I'd say, would just be to go to my Instagram page, which is under my name, which is just Brian with an I, and my last name Walsby, Walsby. I have a Facebook page. I have it set up so that anybody that wants to see any of that stuff can, without being my quote unquote friend. So that's there too. The website that you brought up is pretty outdated, and eventually I'm going to figure out a new website and figure out some new tricks so that more people could, if they're interested in anything I do or the books I've done or want some freelance art, they can reach out to me. But I would say right now, the Instagram page is about the best place anybody can see, because you don't have to be a friend or send a friend request. You can just see whatever, and if people want to write, I always write back and that kind of thing. So I'd say the Instagram page.
It's really funny. I just realized that I probably have a No Means No shirt drawn by you as well.
You don't, because I've tried to pitch a bunch of No Means No shirts, but Abe Brandon is the guy that has worked with Charles from Bifocal Media, and I think he's done 2 or 3. I don't think I've posted stuff and shared it on the fans of that band, their Facebook group, and they've seen that. But I don't think anything I've done has resonated with whoever is in that band that approves such things. I know that we've tried. So you're probably wearing Abe's shirt. Or
Got it.
maybe Chris Sherry, the guy that does the Descendants artwork.
It might be Chris Sherry.
It's probably Chris Sherry. Chris is
What's
a great guy.
what's your relationship like with Bifocal? I love the way you put out like limited edition amounts of shirts. Like, tell me a little bit about that deal, because it's really cool the way you go about releasing these.
Thanks. Well, Bifocal Media is the brainchild of this friend of mine named Charles Cardello. And I've worked with Charles. I've been friends with him for like 15 years now. And Bifocal Media used to be like his record label. He put out records back when people liked putting out records and there was an audience for putting out records and that kind of thing. When it was more of like an operating record label that took ads out of fanzines and magazines back when that was more common. And he's also released 3 of my man-child books. He helped realize all that. And we've done like 50 t-shirts. And I think a couple of mine were the beginning of his t-shirt empire. And now he has all kinds of people. You know, Chris Sherry, Tom Hazelmeyer does stuff for Bifocal Media. Chris Mars of the Replacements. There's a lot more. Abe. There's a lot more people. We just decided to try to do t-shirts one day. We just kind of stumbled into it, or I should say Charles kind of stumbled into it. Now it's this crazy thing. It's doing really well. And we just have limited shirts because we just kind of gauge the interest of, we're allowed to do a Gun Club t-shirt from the band, The Gun Club.
Mm-hmm. that's
a legendary band that's a real honor to be able to do. So we thought we can certainly have a limit to 300 t-shirts. We can sell that eventually. But then there's some things I've done, like, we did an FU shirt. There was a band from Boston from the 80s. They're from my generation. I don't know how many people are really going to want an FU shirt. So we have 100, there's 100 that are made. That's the limit. So we just kind of gauge the limit by what the actual interest level is. We did a Big Star t-shirt 3 times and a hoodie. Obviously there's going to be more of an audience for that than say the FUs. Or there was a band from Sacramento called Rebel Truth who put out an amazing 7-inch from 1983. How many people in 2023 are going to really care about a Rebel Truth t-shirt? Maybe not too many. So, the limits are just there according to whatever, but it works out good. Everybody gets a cut. We get permission from everybody. It's like a 3-way split between the artist in question, Charles, because he's actually keeps the books and makes the t-shirts, fills the orders, and he's honest, and then the people that we're working with, the band in question, whether it's a new band or a band that broke up 40 years ago. So
amazing.
Yeah. And it just keeps going, it's nice. And, it comes in handy. Everybody gets a little piece of something, and it's not some bootlegged shitty piece of shit t-shirt where, these people are being totally ripped off. So, it's worked out pretty well.
Man, that makes me so happy, because I've, purchased several shirts from Bifocal over the years, and that just kind of makes me glad to know about the inner workings of the business and the folks behind it, and kind of how it's just a little small, tight-knit community.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't think it would have lasted as long as it has if we were dishonest or trying to rip people off. But every time a shirt goes up, there's always something, we have to sell these things basically through social media, because it's a social media driven thing. It's like selling a thing at a time. He's doing skateboards too. We did a 7 seconds one, but every time we do anything like that, a shirt, a skate deck, there's always somebody that thinks somebody's being ripped off, and that's never the case. We've actually been bootlegged several times, like myself and plenty of the other people that draw for Charles for Bifocal Media. Tons of designs are ripped off, but that's the way it goes. There's not much you can really do about it.
Well, Brian, I am so delighted that my friend Brett from the Rad Dads podcast brought us together today, and for this extraordinarily random and completely delightful encounter you and I have had today.
Thank you.
People out there listening have no idea until now, because I'm going to say it, that you and I just connected this morning and that we had 5 minutes notice before this interview. So I just think that that's really funny to share, that like sometimes whenever you make a podcast like this, the stars align and you have a wonderful conversation and make a great connection. And I'm so grateful to you for your spontaneity. And you're like, let's just rock this. And I'm like, let's go, man. So
I agree. I was like, this, it's a good opportunity and it's nice to meet you. And the podcast is nice. And I always listen to all kinds of different things when I draw and stuff. And there's nothing quite like having a nice conversation with somebody to make you feel connected as a human being.
Well, Brian,
that's very important.
Your friend Scott Rudansky is on episode 50. So if you wanted to check out an episode, number 50 is the one that I would suggest for you if you were going to check something out in the coming days when you're doing your artwork. Brian Walsby.
I'm going to check it out. And like I said, Scott was, he knew I knew nothing about the universe that Pulley or 10-Foot Pole came out of to this very day. And he said, the one band that you would like that's better than everybody, head and shoulders above everybody. Those are his words, not mine, because I wouldn't know. He said it was Propagandhi. So I have, and Charles from Bifocal Media was the second person that said, well, you would like Propagandhi. So
awesome.
Two people whose opinions I trust. And they luckily pointed me to a very rewarding band full of
wonderful,
nice Canadians.
Couldn't agree more. Brian Walsby, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real thrill.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.